Hello, friends. Kyla here. For the next week, you'll be seeing bonus episodes from the Harbinger Media Network Telethon. We kicked it off with ours and have decided to share the rest so y'all can have a sampling of the wonderful voices we share the network with. This episode, you'll hear Drew Oya-J talk about the Breach Media's Journalism for Transformation, and you'll hear Community University television station manager Sofia Barsowski unpack the 50-year legacy of CUTV. Then Shannon Karenko, Amy Cunningham, and Leah Bortz-Cooperman explain how the Hoser Media is reinventing local journalism in Toronto. And David Gray-Donald discusses the origins of the Toronto underground newspaper, The Grind, a new journalism collaboration between Briarpatch, Press Progress, The Hoser, and other independent progressive media spaces. If you want to watch the 12-hour telethon in full, there is a link in the description. This telethon was part of the fundraising campaign for Harbinger this year, so if you like that Harbinger is bringing together a network of progressive left podcasts in Canada, then you can support the network by going to harbingermedianetwork.com/join. The first 50 to support at the $100 a year level will receive a new release from Canada's legacy left book publisher Between the Lines. Now enjoy this little bonus episode.
Coming up next, we have Drew Oya-J, publisher of The Breach, and my colleague Sofia Barsowski from CUTV, and a little bit more about them in a second. But first, back to Between the Lines. They are our kind of our sponsor for this stream, and so I'm trying to highlight some of their more recent releases on some of this live stream. Stay tuned though, because we do have other great content coming up, including The Hoser after The Breach and Darts and Letters after The Hoser. So another good few hours coming up. But first, another new release from Between the Lines. It's been nearly 10 years since a runaway train loaded with explosive oil derailed in the small town of Lac-Mégantic in Quebec. It claimed 47 lives and destroyed the town's center. But the tragedy that shocked Canada remains unresolved. With no national inquiry into its causes and no changes to Canadian rail safety rules, the survivors have been left to the mercy of predatory developers as they rebuild their town. The perfect capitalist story of the Mégantic disaster is captured in a new book from Between the Lines Press, A Train in the Night, The Tragedy of Lac-Mégantic by Anne-Marie Saint-Selmy and Christian Quesnel, translated from French by W. Donald Wilson. It's a vivid, full-color work of graphic nonfiction telling the story of one of the deadliest rail disasters in Canadian history, piecing together a narrative of how the powerful profit from collective tragedy. Combining the comic strip form with investigative journalism, the authors trace the path of the locomotive from the scene of the crime all the way back to the producers of the black gold, the Wall Street investors, and the politicians in the pocket of $1 billion oil and gas industry. The full story of that night and its aftermath now live on in this new book, illustrating the true human cost of unfettered capitalism. A Train in the Night comes out November 1st from Between the Lines. Find it at btlbooks.com. Between the Lines has been publishing books without bosses since 1977, and we're super happy that they're helping us give away 50 books to new members who support Harbinger at the $50 a year level. But sadly, this is not a stream without bosses. That's right. I have two of my own bosses on this stream. Sofia Barsowski is in Montreal, and Drew Oya-J is also in Montreal. You guys, welcome to I Know What You Did Last Telethon.
Hi, Andre. Thanks for having us.
Drew, it's great to see you.
Happy to be here, Andre. Thanks for having us.
Well, and that's the voice I have to hear every morning when I punch the clock at the CUTV factory. That's right. I am a part-time employee, the broadcast coordinator at CUTV, where I basically just help do whatever they want me to help with. And Sophia's my boss. She's a great boss. Drew's a great boss too. But Sofia, CUTV is kind of a spectacular space that I'm so happy to be a part of. And so we wanted to have you come on the stream and help me talk a little bit about what is CUTV, and a little bit about its legacy and its origins. So yeah, what can you tell us about community university television, Sophia?
Also, I'm glad to hear that you think I'm a good boss. That's nice. CUTV, so we are Concordia University's television station. We're Canada's oldest campus-run television station. So we've been around since 1969, quite a long time. And we have a legacy of being involved with grassroots video journalism, in particular coverage of student protests. We were very active in covering the 2012 student strikes in Montreal. I think that's a notable highlight in CUTV history. And I think we're also a unique sort of space in that we're affiliated with the university and funded by Concordia, but then also a community space at the same time. And so we have student members, but then also community members. So we're open to Montreal as well, and kind of serve, I guess, both of those communities at the same time. And yeah, our main focus is sort of, as I said, promoting grassroots journalism. We have a grassroots coverage fund.
Before we get to the grassroots fund, I just want to highlight it's so weird and so satisfying to be like in the office when either students or community members come in to borrow equipment. And so, yeah, you have people who are like clearly undergrads and they're borrowing like a projector for the K-pop club and watching K-dramas, or they're like doing some YouTube video like from their home, or they're doing something really ambitious that like requires like the lights and like all this stuff. Or there's like community members who just are really into using the medium of video to tell stories about the sort of topics that you don't see in mainstream media, right? So to have that space just be like there for people is so awesome. Even especially so because for a couple of years, the space was closed because of the urgency of the pandemic. Not that the urgency has changed, but access has changed. And so the doors are open again and people are coming in to participate and to use the equipment. How much does it cost every year for students? It's free, but for community members, what's the price to have access to this like $1 million worth of equipment and studio?
For community members, it's $20 annually, and then $10 to renew each year. So yeah, very heavily subsidized. And then there is the only equipment that we do charge for on top of the annual fee is the video cameras, which is $5 a day. So still very reasonable.
It's wild. Yeah, it's like wild. It's like, I mean, it's like a library, but there's just this huge bunch of equipment. And a massive shout out to your predecessor. The previous station manager was Emma Watson, who is actually the co-host of the Gender Troubles podcast at Harbinger. And she basically rebooted the whole library system. So every time we like dig through all these things to find stuff and they're like perfectly cataloged, and then we like go onto the computer and help the students or the community member take them out. It's just so cool. And I always really appreciate the unbelievably huge burden that she carried to make that functional again. So thank you very much to Emma for that. And yeah, the Grassroots Fund is something really exciting. And it's so exactly what you think this kind of space would be doing, right? Which is basically providing small money to help people cover something special. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about the Grassroots Fund and maybe give us some highlights about what we've seen there in 2022.
Yeah, for sure. So the Grassroots Coverage Fund is a fund that exists again for students and then also community members, and we can provide up to $1,500 per project, depending on the scale. And then we also, so it's kind of divided into sort of two categories, if you will. So there's a rapid response coverage portion, and that's for more time-sensitive, one-time events like demonstrations or protests. If someone wants to do coverage on something like that, we can allocate up to $200. And then we have the more sort of like large-scale, I guess more like long-term video projects, which we can allocate up to $1,500 for. And I think it is really exciting to be able to offer funding for, these projects that often don't get funding. And it is definitely tricky to, with video journalism, I think, be, adequately compensated. And so this is just like a small kind of way to, I guess, alleviate that issue. But there have been some really great videos that have come out of that recently. A freelance journalist who often does work for us, Sarah Jesmer. She did coverage on there was a protest on October 7th. Stella, which is an organization in Montreal that does organizing around sex worker rights and issues. They're like a by and for sex worker organization. They were protesting Bill C-36. And so, yeah, she covered that. It was a great video. She also covered a demonstration about the deportation of Mamadou Konate as well. So really great work coming out of her. And it's exciting that we can support her in her career as a journalist as well. So those are some rapid response examples. We also helped fund a sort of more like experimental queer video art project that was created by a friend of mine, Alex Apostolidis, called I Want My LGBTV. So that was like a slightly different sort of vein in that it was like a more, again, creative, artistic, not necessarily journalist, documentarian sort of work per se, but that was another project that we helped fund. And so there's, some room in terms of like the different sorts of projects that we can be a part of. So those are just a few highlights.
And yeah, hearing about that, it's so exciting, and it's so awesome that it gets to reflect like the stories that people want to be covering and doing stuff about. So I love that. I don't love, though, I was just corrected by one of my bosses in the in-house chat. I messed up. I totally called Emma Austin Emma Watson. And one of the reasons for that, Drew corrected me. Thank you, Drew. One of the reasons for that is that CUTV and The Breach are kind of like sister orgs. And at The Breach, there was an Emma Watson that we worked with. I also produced the podcast for The Breach. So there was two Emmas. There was also two Kates, and it got super confusing. There is only one Sophia so far, but they're probably prioritizing hiring a new Sophia at The Breach to make things confusing. But one thing that's not confusing is the amazing content that has been coming out of CUTV over the last year. That's right. I'm talking about Local 514. Sophia, this is CUTV's flagship show hosted by Savannah Craig. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about what does this show do and what were its origins? Maybe Drew would speak to that as well. But Sophia, what is Local 514?
Yeah, I'm glad that you're bringing up Local 514 because I think that they do fantastic work. So they're our news show, and they're, an alternative sort of news program, doing coverage on things that you wouldn't necessarily see being adequately tackled in, mainstream corporate news. So they release bi-weekly episodes, so every 2 weeks. And their most recent episode, which you can find on our website, cutvmontreal.org. Please check it out. They talked about systemic racism in the Quebec healthcare system, which, there's, I think, a lot of really important things to be tackled in that area, obviously in light of Joyce Echaquan's death. And just the larger problems within the healthcare system, especially under the CAQ government. So that was their most recent episode. They also previously talked about Quebec Solidaire, especially with the election that happened recently. So their origins, I think Drew could maybe speak to that a bit better because I'm a more recent addition to the CUTV team. Drew, I don't know if you want to...
Yeah. I'll ask Drew to weigh in. And just to be fair, Sophia has hit the ground running as the new manager about 2 months ago. And so there's been a lot, and you've been incredible at the job. But 514 has been going for about a year and a half. And some other stories that Savannah and her team have covered are inflation and rising grocery prices, the failure of Montreal to hit its carbon targets, organizing at Montreal's Amazon distribution center. And Local 514 is a YouTube show, so it's primarily meant to be a visual medium, but then it's also released as a podcast at the Harbinger network. So Drew, can you tell us a little bit about the origins, like when it came time to sort of like create a flagship show for CUTV, what was the intent with creating this Local 514?
Well, it came up because there's some like long organizing that's been happening in the community TV sector, which is a very very much a struggling sector, I would say. Like the funding for community TV actually came from cable companies who originally gave like 10% of their revenues as sort of the condition of having access to, all the sort of ground to lay all that cable and everything. They were sort of forced to do some public service. So basically providing the local public access TV stations, and there were like 300 of them across the country. Anyway, long story short, that they've whittled that down to almost nothing. And so there's this organization that for the last like 10 years and a bit has been trying to sort of claw back bits of that. It's called Cactus. So that's an organization of basically bringing together the remaining community TV stations. I think there's a few dozen across Canada. And the sort of, they've been trying to get the cable companies to cough up the dough for a long time, but the sort of consolation prize for not being able to do that yet, although we did just have a sort of a major victory in the Bill C-11, I think.
And just to like give a little bit more background, then I'll go back to you. So Rebuild Community Media was an initiative that CUTV was part of spearheading, basically to, like you're saying, rock the boat and try to like make government remember that it used to like actually control the telecoms. So some money went back to community television. And I think because CUTV is such a legacy institution, it was really well poised to like be spearheading that. So sorry, please continue.
Yeah, so that's a campaign that we were part of. That's all sort of background to say that the consolation prize for not getting that yet has been that the government gave a bunch of money to the community TV sector to do local journalism. This is part of a broader local journalism initiative that's sort of funding journalists to do local coverage across the country. And this is sort of the stopgap measure, basically, because in journalism has been completely like decimated across the country. There's hundreds of local newspapers and outlets have closed over the last little while, and this is sort of due to a combination of sort of corporate consolidation within the sector, where they just keep making it more efficient in the sense that they make bigger and bigger papers covering bigger and bigger areas with less and less journalism. But it's also Facebook and Google have just cut the heart out of the advertising that used to be the bread and butter of local media. Anyway, all that to say that we get some of this funding. And so we were like, okay, what can we do in Montreal that would add something to the conversation? And so the mandate for Local 514 is really to cover things from, perspectives that aren't represented, either by the CBC or by the corporate media of various kinds, the dwindling corporate media. Like, we think of the cuts as mainly affecting rural communities, but in Montreal, there have been dozens of journalists fired or laid off, or whatever you want to call it, as a result of these sort of consolidations and cutbacks. And some of them by like super highly profitable corporations like Bell and so on. Anyway, that's, and again, I'm getting off track, but that's the landscape in which Local 514 is trying to provide some sort of regular grassroots local news, talking to communities about issues that affect them, and tackling things from a sort of I would say progressive sort of materialist perspective, I guess, in terms of like looking at those issues, from like understanding the sort of economic interests that are involved, whether it's, driving whether what's driving the housing price crisis and like preventing us from building massive amounts of low cost housing, or whether it's looking at a sort of wave of racist activity that's been sort of but like increasingly infiltrating its way into Quebec's political culture. It's not just looking at that those things are happening, but like why and where is it coming from? What are the economic interests that benefit from that? So like that's really the idea behind Local 514, and Savannah and the journalists who run it have been doing a great job, I think.
And I love that how you can frame it as sort of an answer to how media has been unraveling in a lot of ways. And yeah, Savannah is a graduate of Concordia's journalism program, so she really understands the community, and she's able to speak to things in a wonderful way. And we have another show at CUTV that sort of CUTV incubates and coaches and helps to grow, which is a return of Concordia's French language magazine, which CUTV relaunched as a video magazine, basically, hosted by Clément Lechat, who is also a journalism student at Concordia. And so, Sophia, Logan is not dissimilar to what's done at Local 514, but maybe tell us a little bit about what does Logan do? And by the way, this had been a French, I think, physical magazine that was released monthly for many, many years. It went away for a while, maybe just because there was no one to help carry it. But institutionally, it's been part of Concordia's how it tries to be a voice for Francophone students on the campus. And so Clément has really done a fantastic job bringing the Logan back. Isn't that right, Sophia?
Yeah, definitely. I think Clément does a great job. And I think with Logan, I can't really speak to the history of it really, because I don't know a lot about its origins, but I would assume, within the university, there's a lot of turnover, and it does sometimes happen, especially if a lot of people, graduate or leave, then something can just sort of go dormant. And from my understanding, I believe that's what happened with Logan. But yeah, I think, there's some similarities in terms of, I think, the sorts of coverage that they do. Clément recently had an episode talking about housing co-ops and housing rights and issues within Montreal, which is a topic that, Local 514 has also done coverage on. But then I think definitely the importance of, I guess, having there be French representation, and also within the university, within, I guess, an English school, I think it is important to still, there has been a political history there with being a Francophone person, in an English institution in Montreal. And so I think Lorgan is doing important work in terms of, increasing representation for Francophone students at Concordia, and having there be programming in French, essentially.
I never thought of it that way, but it's because Montreal's a university city. We have 4 major universities and 250, 300,000 students in the city. It's enormous. 2 of the universities are basically French. 2 of them are basically English. So sometimes in terms of how people if they're in a French culture or an Anglophone culture, there can be people looking down at participating in linguistically in one school or the other. So I guess it's kind of nice to normalize, Francophones are going to go to English schools sometimes. Anglos are going to go to French schools sometimes. It's really nice to not otherize linguistically the people. So obviously that's not as present as it has been in terms of Quebec society and culture these days. But in other ways, it's as present as it's ever been, as the CAC loves to otherize linguistically and racially and ethnically and religiously many people all the time. But on a happier note, Sophia, and then we're going to pivot to talking about the breach. On a happier note, workshops at CUTV. We mentioned earlier in this stream, we had Hillary Agro on, and she talked a little bit about her recent workshop for CUTV. So tell us a little bit about some of the past workshops that CUTV's put out as free educational spaces for people to attend and learn, and what do we have coming up later this year and even into next year?
I'm glad that you mentioned Hillary Agro. I was going to bring her up because she's a part of the Harbinger Media Network. But yeah,
do you want to know what her Halloween costume was today?
Oh, what was it?
She went and thrifted zebra like fabric, and then like did up this whole zebra thing with like arm leggings, and she had like zebra bunny ears or something, and she had like zebra made up her eyes. She had been out partying last night, and I'm not sure she had slept that much before coming on the stream, but she was awesome. She looked awesome. It was a dope costume. So anyways,
That seems pretty in line with her persona. She's, she identifies as a rave mom, so that
right.
checks out. Yeah.
So her talk was great. And who else have we had?
Yeah, I mean, the talk with Hillary, I'm sure she spoke about it already, but we talked about, the misrepresentation of drug use in mainstream media. We had a really great conversation in spite of some Zoom bombing, unfortunately. But it was a great talk, and yeah, she did an excellent job. She's, very used to speaking about these subjects and very vocal on social media and TikTok and Twitter, obviously. So she has a lot of experience with that. So yeah, we do sort of more politically centered events like that talk, and then we have this coming Wednesday, a talk that we'll be doing featuring Odette Auger from Indigenews, an Indigenous news outlet located in the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia. We'll be having a talk on decolonizing the news and sort of looking at, I guess, really like the work that Indigenews is doing, and what does it even really mean to decolonize the news, so to speak, like unpacking that word and what it actually means in a more practical journalistic sense. And then also looking at the ways in which mainstream media has often upheld colonial values, and also kind of critiquing the notion of objectivity in journalism, and looking at how historically it has been used as a way to maintain a dominant perspective. That's something that Indigenews, feels very strongly about. And they have, if you check out their websites, they have a lot of interesting things to say about, their sort of like journalistic approach in a decolonial context. And so that will be Wednesday, 4 p.m. EST on Zoom. And we have an Eventbrite set up. Again, you can find information about that on our website or on our Instagram account, CUTV Montreal.
Well, and in fact, it's not yet up at the website, so definitely go to Instagram to find the Eventbrite details, because people should definitely want to check out this talk coming up this coming Wednesday. And that's free to attend. It doesn't cost any money.
It is free. Yes, what? That is correct. I'm actually just gonna post the link to the Eventbrite in the chat, so everyone can see it there. But yeah, we have that event coming up, but we also have more sort of just like practical tutorials for, mainly geared towards students and CUTV members that are very hands-on, just like how to, we recently had a how to use a video camera for like a beginner workshop. And then we also will be having a video editing workshop with Ode from Local 514. And because you were talking earlier about, like we have the equipment rentals, and we're very much, a community space where we're trying to remove barriers for people being able to access this equipment and use it. And providing these workshops and tutorials is very much a key part of that. It's providing these equipment rentals and then giving people the skills to use this equipment, especially when that knowledge is sometimes sort of gatekept from people. And it can be really confusing to navigate how to make your own video footage if you're, new to this world. So that is, I think, like a really key part of like what we do at CUTV.
Absolutely. And so just for people, you'll definitely want to subscribe to Local 514 at YouTube, on social media, TikTok, Instagram, etc. Same with CUTV. Follow it everywhere you would look for social media. And if you're in Montreal, definitely get involved. We love having people come by the space and become members. If you're a Concordia student, definitely come by and check out the equipment. Come borrow it, come use it, because that's why it's there. And we love when people are using it. It's so awesome. So Sophia, I really appreciate you being able to kind of like explore everything about the station, because it's awesome. It's been around for 55 years. So yeah, I love it. Thank you very much. Let's then pivot to the other half of this segment. And Drew, it's interesting that The Breach is also a year old. This has really been a year where a lot of new media spaces have sort of like turned the clock. Harbinger just turned 2, Pivot just turned 1. So really quickly, can you just sort of tell us the origins of The Breach and what the last year has been? Because it was so exciting when it launched so big, and the content has been so consistently excellent over the last year. So I've been amazed, and I'm not just saying that because you're my boss. So what is the origins then of The Breach?
Yeah, I mean, The Breach comes out of a whole series of conversations that a bunch of us have been having for years or decades, depending on when you want to start counting. Certainly a bunch of the people involved were involved in the media co-op and the Dominion back. It started in 2003 and ran until the media co-op's still going, but I left in 2015. But yeah, so there's a whole history of media projects and grassroots sort of journalism that goes way back. But the real idea behind The Breach right now is journalism for transformation. That's our tagline. That's we're interested in covering movements that can transform society or have the potential to transform society and the economy. And obviously that's it's a difficult thing to do at this moment in time. It requires sort of optimism in the face of some pretty pessimistic conditions. But that's really the fundamental idea. And then furthermore, it's a sort of a belief in our ability to find ways to create journalism and coverage about those things that punches through. So it gets out of the sort of activist bubble, out of the sort of progressive media bubble, and into the sort of mainstream. And we've seen that. I think we've been successful on a few occasions. I don't think we're nearly satisfied with with how much we've been able to do that, but things like the blood plasma privatization story managed to really sort of set the news agenda outside of in the corporate press, basically. The Globe and Mail covered it a week and a bit after we did, and didn't credit us, and then they got they got dissed for it. And it, it's just that kind of thing where it's okay, something can go can really reach tens of thousands of people and sort of be in the consciousness of hundreds of thousands of people. And generally what we find is that movements have to create those moments. They don't just sort of happen by themselves, but journalism can, in a more limited way, sort of create those moments as well, if you do it in just the right way or catch just the right nerve or moment of public consciousness. And
one thing with The Breach too is just that it looks so good, it reads so well, because you guys are extremely good editors and you work really closely with your journalists, and so it comes off just so fully and completely, right? It's beautiful to look at and it's wonderful to read.
Yeah,
and I think that sort of professionalism is really exceptional.
For better or for worse, we put a lot of energy into every article. At least 2 editors look at every article. We have an art director who dials up amazing sort of custom artwork for each article. We definitely are trying to go beyond the sort of usual progressive media copy paste somebody's submission. I'm not knocking it. I've done a lot of that, but the result is that you have a lot less coverage, but hopefully of a quality that can find a way to sort of again punch through that bubble and reach a mainstream audience and set the agenda, in the larger political and media sphere.
And it's completely grassroots funded. It doesn't receive any sort of big dark money. And so people should, if they haven't already, check it out at breachmedia.ca. Some of the stories that you guys have been, I want to say too, since I'm kind of behind the scenes, since I produced the podcast for The Breach, I've been in the meetings with this sprawling cast of contributors who do all kinds of different roles from coast to coast, and just such high quality people. So it's been I didn't know that that's what it would be like when I started working with you guys. So it's been really, really amazing to see. And yeah, it's just so cool. So
Yeah,
what are some...
our team can be described as sprawling. Certainly, there are a lot of different people involved in all the different aspects.
Yeah.
People everywhere from Halifax to Vancouver to Spain to various other points in between and north.
Yeah, it's incredible. And so when these stories come out, I read them and I sort of know like how the recipe is made. But the stories themselves are so great that like that doesn't. Anyways, it's wonderful. So we wanted to talk about a few of the stories that the breach has released recently. One I haven't read yet, which is the seaweed farming piece. Can you?
Yeah, I threw that in there because I'm a huge nerd.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
And but I think it comes off as a pretty nerdy story. Like it's basically about this seaweed farming that's happening on the sort of coast of BC, and that's part of sort of a big like worldwide explosion in sort of seaweed farming, which has all kinds of different facets to it. But the angle that was really, I thought, really interesting. I mean, so I guess the background is that there's just been nonstop wall to wall positive coverage of this. It's like, oh, it's a ecologically oriented, climate friendly economic development opportunity for First Nations. Like it has all these like really positive coverage on across the board, like in global news outlets, Canadian news outlets, local news outlets in BC. Like it's really pretty like unambiguously this is like a really positive, hopeful thing, and definitely one aspect of the story that was written by Holly Dressel, longtime a collaborator of David Suzuki's, but also a longtime journalist and filmmaker here near Montreal. I think part of it was sort of like, okay, well, let's pour a little bit of cold water, no pun intended, on those claims, but like, but I think that there's a bigger piece that it really gets at that I think is, could be lost in the sort of, if you don't read past the first paragraph or something, which is that there's this growing sort of bubble of climate capital, which is like all this money from corporations being like, oh, we're emitting, but we don't want to stop. And so we need to like make that look better. And we're going to pay somebody to like do that for us. And so seaweed, of course, is one of the ways that's done. And it's sort of in the context of this like bigger, like there have been several attempts to use the ocean to generate carbon credits in really like dubious ways. And that have actually been slapped down by sort of international activism. Whether it's like Sea Shepherd or EDC Group. Full disclosure, I used to work there. But yeah, so there's this bigger sort of economic pressure globally to commodify the ocean and turn it into this like carbon sequestration machine, right? And seaweed is the one area where they've been able to sort of like start to get that motor going. And once capital starts investing in something and creating, like mobilizing a hype machine and then creating a lot of jobs around it, and then you get politicians who are invested in it, you get media who are invested in it, and it creates this like snowball effect, right? Where things really get their own momentum. You see Silicon Valley use this sort of similar technique where it's just like flash floods of capital into a sector with all these big promises, and it doesn't really matter whether they're true or not because there's just so much hype. And so, yeah, we're worried about this happening with seaweed, but also just like keeping an eye on this bigger sort of attempt to commodify the ocean and how this is sort of the thin edge of the wedge. It's like, of course, it's going to be like the most, and it's not to knock the seaweed industry. Like, obviously, there are ways to cultivate seaweed. Well, maybe not obviously. Some of the people in the article don't think that there are at all, but that there are ways to harvest seaweed and do that sustainably and have a business with that. But just a second. But but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something that's going to try to scale up by orders of magnitude, and as a way to sort of like sequester carbon, like whether it's like growing seaweed and then burying it at the bottom of the ocean or whatever it is. That's going to like have massively, that if it's done, will have massively negative ecological impacts, and probably won't actually have the climate thing, like the climate impacts that it's claiming to have. And so it's just this like just totally negative capitalistic enterprise.
So I love how The Breach can go so deep on a specific topic, and it's clear how passionate you are about it. And it reminds me too that The Breach is really able to straddle all kinds of different spaces, because like deep ecological stuff, right? But then also the story that Martin Lukács wrote, kind of reviewing the disqualification of Anjali Appadurai, which was such a huge bummer last week. She was running for the leadership of the BC NDP, and they basically kneecapped her, and it was just like so ugly to see. But the piece of The Breach was exceptional. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Anjali Appadurai had a sort of an accidental Bernie Sanders moment in BC. Like she, they put together this totally last minute campaign because nobody else was, David Eby, who's, like vaguely more progressive than his predecessors, was running unopposed with like the support of the vast majority of the caucus for the BC NDP. So basically this person who wins this leadership race is going to become premier of BC, and spoiler alert, that's what Eby is becoming in a few days. But Anjali put together this campaign to be like, okay, we're going to raise climate. We're going to like have the movements represented on the debate stage. Like we have to use this opportunity. Mm-hmm. But then almost by accident, they had like a month to organize. It was just like thrown together. Like, I think a lot of, the campaign team was like a real mixed bag in terms of like experience levels and stuff. It was not like a carefully planned out, fundraised, organized thing. It was just like, let's do this. And it as it turns out, they were able to, as all indications, the NDP has been completely mum about this, but all indications suggest that they were able to sign up way more members, like not just way more members than Eby, but way more members than the existing membership of the NDP.
Right.
Which of the BC NDP, which is wild. And really unexpected, I think, by basically everybody involved. Like nobody expected her to win, and so she was on the she was on the verge of winning because she had signed up all these things. But then the BC NDP, like which is actually surrounded by and has a revolving door with the fossil fuel lobby. Mm-hmm. Saw this like 32-year-old climate activist like poised to become the premier. And I think it was just for them, it was just like, this cannot happen. Like it just cannot happen. There's just,
and just to
like,
say,
we don't care what norms we have to bring, right? Sorry, go ahead.
Anjali as well. Right. But just to say, Anjali as well ran for the federal NDP in the last federal election. She came 500, who was a house flipping loser. Yep. And so she's like part of the party. She's not some outsider. She's
no. I mean, that was the story they were spinning, but they had to do something, right? They had to spin some story. But that's actually, if you look at the lobbying records of all the people who were spinning these stories on and getting invited on as like NDP insiders and like people close to the party on all these like, talk shows and in newspaper articles and stuff, they're actually all like fossil fuel lobbyists, like a bunch of them, like Jeff Ferrier, Michael Gardner, Raj Sahota, even the person who's in charge of the leadership race works for Hill and Knowlton, which is like a fossil fuel lobbying. I mean, it's a lobbying, it's a lobbying and strategy firm that does a bunch of things. But one of the things that it definitely does is works with fossil fuel interests, like both in BC itself, but also globally. Like they work for like Saudi Aramco and stuff. So it's wild. It's the actual person who disqualified Anjali was, part of that sort of coterie of fossil fuel, aligned people.
And so in Martin's piece, I mean, he basically did some very good journalism where he dug up the like, he had the connections, he had the stories, did the legwork, and he pulled together like a basic like autopsy of what had occurred.
Yeah, so Martin was able to unearth like a bunch of things that were not previously reported, so really expanding the picture of like the extent of like things that weren't covered before, where like the rule change, like they actually changed the rules retroactively. So the rule, like there's this long report that was leaked that the Elizabeth Cull, this fossil fuel lobbyist who's in charge of leadership race, put out, that was indicting Angeli for like collaborating. The main charge of collaboration was actually a rule change that happened after the event that she was describing in the report. This like Zoom call in the summer. So that was like a wild detail. And then there was a piece about public outreach, which is like this major sort of fundraising and outreach sort of consultancy in BC that's BC based, but that's all over Canada. And they were actually contracted to do what one former NDP official called like basically a voter suppression campaign. So they called like 7,000 people and basically asked them questions in a way that was intended probably to intimidate them and just keep them from voting. Obviously, they didn't have to go that far. That ended up being sort of useless because they just pulled the plug on the whole leadership race to keep her from winning. But anyway.
Well, and so I wanted to, we only have 6 minutes left in this segment, so I do want to talk about one more piece of the breach. But sure. I want to comment that I think what struck me about Martin's piece is that it was documenting something really important that had happened and that was like really gross politically, and there might never be a book written about it. So having this sort of documentation, I think, is a really incredible kind of journalism that you don't find, in a lot of spaces. So people can read that at breachmedia.ca. But the one more piece I wanted to touch on before we wrap is the piece that was published a couple days ago by Michael Rancic, Overcoming Isolation, Sex Workers Are Organizing for Life-Saving Reforms. So Drew, maybe you can really quickly give us the lowdown on that. And then I'd love it if Sophia could connect that a little bit with the talk that's coming up at CUTV in a few weeks. Go ahead. Yeah,
we actually used some of CUTV's coverage. CUTV had some video coverage of some of these demonstrations that have been happening. So, but the long and the short of it is that this piece is documenting this, and this has come back to the sort of transformative journalism, because there's this, despite it being basically illegal, technically illegal for sex workers to organize or to support sex workers in organizing, there's a coalition of groups from across the country that have been pushing for reform of the sort of very sort of anyway, like basically these laws that are from the Harper era that they say are extremely dangerous, or that make their lives dangerous, make their work very hazardous. And so, those are the voices that are sort of documented. He talks to all the, the journalist talks to all these different people across the country who've taken part in these demonstrations and who are dealing with these different things. And I think a notable thing in there is that, they're workers, but organized labor has by and large, I'm sure there are exceptions, but by and large, not really given them the time of day. So there's that to contend with as well, even though this is clearly like a highly mobilized, increasingly organized, section of the economy where workers are standing up for themselves.
Mm-hmm. And Sophia, can you tie that in a little bit and maybe just remind us about this talk that's coming up at CUTV pretty soon?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think this is kind of a great sort of note to end on, because it kind of ties in, the ways in which CUTV and the breach, there's a kind of, I guess, like some overlap. Like, we're different organizations, but then there's, overlap in terms of covering, some similar topics. And with the footage, the CUTV footage being used in this article, I think it's like a nice sort of ending point. But I guess just going back to what I was saying earlier about upcoming events, just another reminder about the talk that we have with Odette. Is that what you were referring to in regards to events? Yeah. So we'll be having the talk with Odette again this coming Wednesday, 4 p.m. p.m. EST on Zoom. I shared the Eventbrite link so you can very easily register there. It is free, and we will be talking about decolonizing the news and the work that Indigenews is doing.
Amazing. And so definitely people can check out cutvmontreal.org to get updates on all of the new workshops and everything at the station. And people should definitely check out breachmedia.ca to follow the important work they're doing and to become a supporter. It does take the support of people who are viewing this kind of stream to really keep that sort of work alive. And of course, follow these guys, CUTV and The Breach, on social media. Drew Ojije and Sofia Hurst-Barsowski, I know you guys are excited about the Oppo reboot, and I have some important news that is just coming in on, I just got an email from the Harbinger Board of Directors. It's in negotiation right now if the Harbinger Board is going to greenlight this project or not. We are just waiting to see if enough support comes in on this stream, if we can really afford to buy the rights from Canada Land to reboot Oppo with Max Fawcett and Robin Urbach. I am waiting on that, and I'm going to have more information to reveal.
Fun fact, Andre. Yeah. Justin Ling was an intern at the Media Co-op back in the late 2000s. So
I remember when you mentioned that. Also, fun fact, Justin Ling occasionally drinks at my favorite bar, Les Verres Stylisés, on the Plateau, and it always makes me kind of mad. It's like, what are you doing here? Get out of here. But also, that wouldn't be nice. I would never confront him about that. Sofia Hurst-Barsowski is the station manager at CTV. Drew Ojije is the executive director of CTV and the publisher at The Breach. You guys, I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having us, Andre. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Andre. Bye-bye.
Hi, all. My name is Shannon Karanko. I'm a co-founder of The Hoser, which is, if you know about us, we're an independent media network. We're a website in Toronto, and we cover local news in the GTA.
I'm Amy Cunningham, and I contribute to The Hoser in various ways.
I'm Leah Bortz-Kugelman. I do social media and newsletter editing.
So, yeah, we're just going to tell you a little bit about sort of the work we do with The Hoser. We are connected with the Harbinger Media Network because we have a podcast called Fort Circuit that I host along with other Hoser co-founder Kevin Egabon and our producers Eric Wickham. Actually has another podcast called Big Shiny Takes that he does with Marino, who is also helping out today. We're a big community. But yeah, maybe we can start with some of the questions.
Yeah, for sure. I'm wondering, Shannon, how do you think the Hoser's changed since a year ago even?
Yeah. So we launched our website in April 2021, and we were pretty slow going with publishing, maybe 4 or 5 articles a month, sometimes more, sometimes less, through that first year. And then we ended up getting this grant this summer, believe it or not, through Meta, because they have destroyed journalism over the last 15 to 20 years and are trying to put money back into it, I guess probably as a tax write-off. But we took their money, and through the summer, over the last 6 months, we've been reporting at least twice a week, sometimes 3, sometimes 4. And it's just really enabled us to do more journalism. We've been able to expand our reporters. We've worked with some really incredible people over the last 6 months, and obviously since starting the Hoser. But what else do you guys think?
Yeah, one of the cool things that I'm really excited about is we've been doing our newsletter for about 5 or 6 months now, and then recently we realized we have a ton of content that we want to share, so we've split it up into every other week. You'll be getting, if you're signed up for a newsletter, a long read essay written by Amy, and they're usually really hilarious, and sometimes I cry while reading them, often about pumpkins. So it's on brand.
There's been a lot of pumpkin themed stuff lately.
Yeah.
And like how to oh, sorry, we're getting a kind request to speak a little bit louder. Yeah, like so Amy grew these pumpkins in Toronto. We had like Amy and I lived together, and we had like a beautiful pumpkin garden in our front yard here in Parkdale. Maybe we can talk about the pumpkins a little.
The pumpkins are very important. They taught me a lot about the world and the people in it. And I feel like I'm doing like a report about my summer vacation. But basically, as Leia was talking about the newsletter, there's like the longer read newsletter, an essay that I write, and then and as well as just like a roundup of content from like directly from the site. And what I write isn't immediately available on the website, so it's like extra content, and it's kind of I like to describe it as kind of a non-essential information, and it's just kind of about like anything that is like themed around just like being in Toronto, like physically like present in Toronto, and just like experiencing the sensory experience of being here. And I grew these pumpkins in my front yard. It was a lot of what I did this summer, and I had a lot of thoughts. So also, how's our volume?
Can you hear us okay? Can we get a thumbs up?
Y'all are coming in great.
Excellent.
Wow.
Marina, do you like our lighting here?
I love the theme. It's very it's
Which one's better? Which one's spookier?
I can't
Which one has more journalistic integrity?
It's like choosing between two of my sons, these beautiful bats.
Oh, yeah.
Anyways, I'm back into the darkness with me.
Oh yeah. Well, the darkness is the theme. We all come from the darkness.
Yeah, let's go with our other questions.
Yeah. Amy, what's the favorite story that you've worked on for the Hoser, or just like maybe a story that I've worked on for the Hoser? What's your favorite story?
It's a lot of pressure.
So we like worked on like, because we also like edit stories, or is that I like personally wrote?
Both. Do you have a favorite?
The ones that I like the best are never the ones that I get the most like messages about from you guys and like from other people. The garden one from last year was fun. I tried to garden last year in the backyard, and there wasn't enough sun, and everything died, and it was just it's a very bleak, sad story that a lot of people will talk about to their children for generations to come. And then, but the one of the ones that I like had the highest aspirations for, but like maybe didn't achieve, was I wrote an essay about all the times that I couldn't get a box spring all the way into a new apartment in Toronto. And it has happened to me a lot of times here, and it just feels like a part of the experience of being in these like weird apartments that like were meant to be apartments with these creepy hallways. Spooky also. Yeah, but that it reminds me and that like as I have been doing this for like over 10 years of living in Toronto, trying to get these box springs up into these like third floor attic spaces, and then one day my friend was like, why do you even have a box spring? And I was like, oh, I don't know, because like my dad bought me one once, and I thought this is like an essential thing that like no matter where I went in this world, no matter what happened to me, I would have to have a box spring under my mattress. And then I just realized that box springs represent these kind of outdated value systems that we inherit from our parents.
That's so great.
Good choice. Excellent choice. I also love that box spring essay. Shannon.
Did you?
Yes. What's your favorite story?
That's a really hard question for me to answer.
Mm-hmm.
I guess like recently, so Ian Wilms and Megan Dallaire. Ian's a photojournalist, really incredible photojournalist, and Megan Dallaire, who happens to be his partner, is also just a fantastic journalist and writer. And they worked on this piece together for us about the like Don River, Portland's
Naturalization project.
Naturalization project, I guess is like the correct term to use there. And basically Toronto is like spending like $1 billion like revitalizing this whole area. And
it was ruined by previous development too.
Yeah, like from the late 1800s until today. And it's sort of like a deep dive into like what that project is, how that whole river system and how it comes into Lake Ontario, like was sort of destroyed over the years. Yeah, and what they're doing to like preserve it. And the whole sort of crux of that article is that, you know, the city knew that this needed to be done forever. And, you know, they didn't do anything until this like multi-million dollar condo project like took an interest in developing that area. And so now they sort of have to fix it. And so Ian went down there a few times and just took all of these like incredible photos. And it's just like a really wonderful investigative piece. And it's like pretty great to have so much investigative content on our website now. We've been able to like put our resources into that reporting work. And we're just like continuing to like develop our investigative sections and just as well as our whole website.
Yeah, I feel like investigations have been like a really big part of the Hosier's growth in the last year, and like all the amazing investigative journalists that we've worked with. It's been really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your favorite?
I've been thinking about this and I've had time. So I did like a Q&A style interview with a death doula who runs these groups called BIPOC Death Talks. And so she runs with her partner in the project these free monthly talks. And it was just like, for me, like really eye-opening to learn about what a death doula does, and like that there are those in Toronto that specialize in BIPOC grief, and like just hearing some of the compassion and like the incredible work that this person does. That was like one of my favorite interviews that I've done.
What does a death doula do?
Yeah, so a death doula, essentially the way a birth doula helps the birthing person, a death doula always is accompanying a person who is dying and helping them make sure that their last weeks, their last days are exactly as they want. So maybe it's like preparing the family for like what they could be experiencing, and or setting up like a vigiling schedule. And vigiling is like when like someone is sitting beside the dying person at all times, so they never have to die alone. And like death doula, like even if there is like a supportive family, it's just like your person making sure that like your death is as you want it to be.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
Yeah.
We've got 15 more minutes here. Maybe we should talk a little bit more about the podcast.
Yeah, let's do that.
So yeah, we've had I think about 6 episodes of Short Circuit now. And so the focus of it is on food insecurity and labor in Toronto. And so we've had like a very like sort of wide and open array of stories that we've done. And yeah, I think we like really were encouraged to do it and like sort of committed to doing this podcast, a huge part because of Harbinger, and just sort of like the community that this network is, especially Andre Goulet is just like so supportive and really like helped us get it off the ground. And honestly, I'm not sure that we we could have done it without him, and without Eric, of course, Eric Wickham, Big Shiny Takes. Yeah, it's just like, you know, like as journalists, you know, once you sort of like graduate university and you're not working in mainstream media, there's like, it feels like there's very few supports out there for us. And just to have the Harbinger network, you know, like have Andre like reach out to us, like talk over like our concept, talk over our name and our branding, you know, like really just like offer like so much guidance and support was amazing. And I definitely encourage people to provide some funding today for the Harbinger Media Network, because like, yeah, it's just such a wonderful thing, and like really also like one of a kind in Canada.
Like, what are your hopes for the podcast in future episodes?
We've got so much. I would say we'd love to do some more stories on labor. Like some of the stuff that we've done with labor, we were able to like go to like a QP demonstration that workers of University of Toronto like staged like a demo of like they wrote this letter and delivered it to the president of U of T, because I believe it was with their like healthcare benefits were being taken away, as well as like U of T was like hiring like part-time workers that didn't have to be part of the union, and it was just like a pretty ridiculous situation. Anyway, so we like have like audio recordings of like, you know, like following this group of people through the University of Toronto, going to the president's office. It's just like a really like sort of wonderful immersive like sound experience, I guess you could say. You know, like it's not every day that you get to like be that up close and personal with demos like that. So I would really love to do more stuff like that, just like taking our listeners into these situations that just sort of like make these issues more intimate, and like relatable, you know, and educational.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to talk about, speaking of up close and personal, is community events that we've been doing more and more of.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely something that helps us get to know our audience, and also helps our audience get to know us, and like bring a much more like personal touch on some of the stories when we do things like trivia nights or like story circles, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think like one of the first like sort of in-person events we've had, like especially through the pandemic, it's been like hard to organize things because you know, especially in the winter, it's like harder to do things outside in a safe way.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we've had a few. One of the first ones, like, so part of like the Hosers like MO is just like creating community like within sort of the journalism scene in the GTA as well. So like we had like a gathering of like mostly young journalists at a bar, you know, where we were able to just like kind of talk shit about mainstream media and, you know, like working conditions and pay. And, you know, it wasn't really like a networking thing. It was more of like, let's commiserate together and like also, you know, like talk about why we do the work that we do. And we'd like to have more events like that in the future too. Because again, like, you know, it's, especially if you're freelancing, like there's so little support out there. And I think like we need to stick together and especially like fight for better, you know, like freelancing pay and standards and that kind of thing. So what other events have we had?
Trivia.
The food trivia.
We had trivia.
I said weed trivia.
Oh, weed trivia. Yeah. Weed labor trivia.
Yes, that was really cool. And I learned a lot about weed labor and like just a lot of like some egregious facts and like very interesting ones.
And this is, so we had this like collaborative project that we did with the Green Line in Toronto. They're another like incredible indie media outlet that everyone should check out. And Rabble as well. And so the three of us collaborated with Megan Kinch, who is just like a fantastic labor reporter in the GTA. And Megan wrote about like the labor that goes into the marijuana industry in Ontario. And they did like such a fantastic job on it. And it was like, I want to say like a 8-month project, and just like required like, you know, so much investigative reporting, so much research. And then when the article was published, we had this really cool event at a bar in Parkdale here, where, you know, we were able to like ask Megan questions and, you know, sort of invite members of like the marijuana labor community in the GTA and who gave feedback. And yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah. Was there a question about what do you do when all of your friends are harvesting their own weed plants and no one will hang out with you for like 3 solid weeks? What's the answer? I need to know the answer to that question. And then you can't go to their house because it smells skunky, which is very relevant now because there was a dog that got sprayed by a skunk last night.
It's very skunky in here.
It's been our whole morning is de-skunking this dog.
I don't know if you've ever tried to de-skunk a husky Samoyed, but let me tell you, a fluffy boy who doesn't like water, I feel different. I feel like I'm a different person now.
It was like very funny and also a little bit dramatic.
There's like a good chance Amy's gonna write an essay about it for the next newsletter.
Yeah, I just
teaser.
Yeah, I mean, I do need to. It's in the queue with Matthias gets sprayed by a skunk. Matthias accidentally kills a ferret. Matthias, he's just like a well of content. This fluffy boy.
This made me think of one of my favorite, I guess it was like kind of a listicle, but more like just a list that you put in the essay, which was all the things you found in Toronto bike lanes that aren't bikes or people.
Oh, right. Yeah. Oh, yeah, because we did. See, the thing is, I write these essays in a fugue state, and so it's hard for me to remember anything. But yeah, that I even did it. But yeah, we did the one about bikes. Biking in Toronto, which is obviously a big like issue kind of politically, like in a municipal way, but also it's a big part of like Toronto identity, like people who are cyclists here, because it's so hard. We like identify strongly with our cycling. Anyway, and then we also wrote, a long list of all the things that are in the bike lanes that aren't the bikes. And they're numerous. And that went on social media. Have you heard of social media?
Yeah, I think that was like one of our better performing posts this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's great.
Also, like the Bond Place Shelter Hotel, like really just like blew things out of the water. Like we had so much like interaction and engagement on that post.
Yeah.
And our TikTok.
Yeah, we have a TikTok now. It took us like a really long time to get on TikTok.
In
TikTok years. But I think it's because like their social media manager is scared of TikTok. I am scared of TikTok. But a really incredible reporter named Maria Saru does like these great TikTok videos that like really do a great job of like summarizing some of like the key points that I think, and like in serious articles, but also like fun, just like Toronto lifestyle, kind of Toronto living style videos as well. So it's really fun.
Yeah. Oh, it's been good. I think like one of our videos has like 50,000 views, which seems like a lot in the TikTok universe. I don't know.
Yeah, like we all explained about it. I think it's a lot. You hear that?
I don't know. Do we have we've got about 5 more minutes or so?
Yeah.
Are there any questions that people have for us?
This type is very small. And no.
Okay.
One other thing I wanted to talk about, I feel like we talked about like the long read newsy a lot. So that comes on like alternating weeks with like thematic fun events to help you plan a fun weekend. And then also on alternating weeks, we've just started doing this like critical news roundup of like all the most important stories that like we feel we've covered in the last couple of weeks. And also a way to kind of like get to know your reporters. So like that's something I'm excited about, is like the reporters who are telling these important stories and doing these investigations like really are like our neighbors, and like are great people who have like a lot to say. And so we have been just making a point to like feature our reporters and give people a chance to like really get to know them. They're not some abstract individuals working in an office. Like they really care about the community issues. And so that's been cool.
They're not algorithms. They're real pumpkin-based people.
Awesome. Yeah. Did you? What were we going to talk about?
Well,
is that about it?
I mean, the next segment we could talk about what's coming up, because
Oh my God!
Good thinking.
Whoa. Okay. So we collaborated on this really wild thing called The Grind. It's a friggin' newspaper. Can you believe it? These things still exist.
IRL.
This is actually the article that I was referencing before by Megan Dallaire and Ian Wilms. You guys can see there's some really great pictures there. But we collaborated with several other indie media people in Toronto that our friend David Gray Donald is about to tell you all about. But yeah, basically we just put out a newspaper and we're like in the midst of fundraising for it as well. You can follow it at, I believe it's The Grind, at The Grind TO. There's lots of potential for new journalism there. And I guess the idea is that like we are republishing like independent media articles, including like Press Progress and like other like Harbinger Media Network members content every couple of months. There's a few Hoser articles in there, and it's exciting stuff.
Someone in the chat named 3 Colors Trilogy says, hi, Hoser folks. Hi, 3 Colors Trilogy. Thanks for the love.
Also, we're wearing Hoser t-shirts.
We have Hoser t-shirts.
There's raccoons on the back, but we're squish, so it's hard to. Okay, yeah. Cam girl this.
Oh God.
Here we go. Right?
Okay, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marino. Thanks, Andre.
I think Dave and Andre are coming in.
Are they coming
Everybody
in?
picture them.
Dave!
Oh
Oh my God, I'm so powerful. Hello.
Hi.
Oh, hey. Hi, guys.
Space.
It was so spooky watching you guys talk about the Hoser's latest work. Did you guys plan on making it that scary?
Yes.
Yeah.
We put a lot of effort into decorating before our talk today.
It's terrifying, but what's not terrifying has been the success of the Hoser since it launched about a year ago. And so it's been wonderful to see you guys grow and succeed. And I'm really happy that you could be part of the stream today. So are we ready to pivot to talking about The Grind?
Pivot right up.
So maybe before we transition to Dave, Shannon, can you give us a little bit of background on the Hoser's participation in launching The Grind?
Yeah, it's a bit of a long story. There was a lot of stuff before we decided to like create our own publication, The Grind. But yeah, basically, Kevin and I have been working very closely with Dave, especially like through the last, I don't know, 6 months or so. Yeah, in like wanting to, I don't want to say revive print media, but yeah, like create something that is like accessible to like people across the GTA, specifically within the subway system. And so like we are editors, Kevin and I are editors for The Grind. And there's like several like Hoser articles within this issue. And so the idea is that, you know, depending on like what the Hoser's content is every month, you know, we will like cherry pick articles like from our outlet that we think would like fit the Grind's MO and yeah, sort of like get it out to a wider audience than, you know, or maybe an audience that like isn't automatically sort of like drawn to the Hoser in general. You know, it's like people going to work on the TTC, picking up this paper and seeing all of this like independent media content that they've never heard of before.
I saw someone reading it at Larry's Folly today and I almost screamed.
Yeah. And so when I heard the rumors about this new project launching, it had kind of been in the works for a long time. And I was like, are they serious? Because it seemed kind of too good to be true. I grew up in an era when alt weeklies were common and you could pick them up all the time. And they were kind of one of the major spaces for knowing what's going on and having perspectives that are outside of the mainstream. So I was like really, really excited to see it actually come to fruition. So Dave Great Donald, can you tell us a little bit more about the origins of how The Grind came to be and maybe your own relationship with alt weeklies and why this seemed like a good idea and why right now?
Oh, cool. Yeah. And thanks, Andre, so much for hosting this. Love Harbinger, love what you do. Thanks so much for inviting us on. So please support Harbinger Media Network. The link is in the chat. Yeah, so I worked as the publisher at Briar Patch for about 3 years in Regina, Saskatchewan, Treaty 4 territory. And Briar Patch folks are coming on later today. Really looking forward to that. And we were sending out the publication to between 1,000 and 2,000 print subscribers and getting out to like lots of people online. Actually, Toronto is the single city with the largest online readership of Briar Patch. It's a national publication. But I've always been like, we want to scale up the reach that we have as indie media makers. We're making good stuff. We want to get it out to more people. How do we do that? And yeah, and to your other question, alt weeklies. I grew up in Toronto. I remember picking up Now magazine, the This Was Now from a few years ago. Great indie alt weekly. Picking it up at the back of like the Queen streetcar. These like dingy old streetcars. And the back area of the streetcar was like fit like 7 seats, and people would always be back there like chit chatting. There'd be publications flying around and like beer bottles like falling over. So yeah, I have like memories of picking up Now and seeing like a really vibrant city, a very different city than I was seeing in like the Globe and Mail or the Toronto Star. And so what has happened, if you haven't been following with Now and also the Georgia Strait, that's a different story in Vancouver. But Now and the Strait were both bought up from their founders. They're both founded in like the 70s and 80s. They were bought up by these kind of tech investor guys. And about 2 years ago, Now was bought for $2 million. The Georgia Strait was bought for like $1.2 0.25 or something. And the company went bankrupt in February. So that started like, I was like, oh shit, like, okay, like what's going to happen? So we're trying to follow closely what the hell is going to happen with this thing. I should put a little aside. The Toronto Star was sold 2 years ago, early in the pandemic, and it was sold eventually for about $60 million. When it was up for sale, I was like, can we find anyone who wants to buy the biggest single circulation newspaper in Canada for $60 million and make it like an unabashedly left publication? And the answer was no. No one wanted to do that. There were a couple of people who were like, yeah, I have like, some hundreds of thousands of dollars or something, kind of liberals I was talking to. So I don't know if that would have worked. But it sort of like that kind of thing is like really exciting to me, and like trying to get the infrastructure to get out the media that we have. And I think I've sent a photo, Marino, to you of someone who is not exactly an inspiration, but he's a very scary figure. I don't know if we can bring up this image.
Back in black.
Very, very scary figure.
Former felon.
But you could call him Conrad, or you could also think of like, how do we make like a comrade version
Comrade Black? Comrade Black?
I think we should all think of ourselves as Comrade Black. We are all Comrade Black.
I like this. So I love this. Just to interject for a second, the heritage for people who are a little bit older for Alt Weekly is really interesting, because me too, like growing up in Edmonton, I would have picked up C and View were like the competing Alt Weeklies. Okay. Later when I moved to Montreal, it was EC, and in English it was Mirror and The Hour. And then they all just sort of like unraveled within the last decade. So suddenly there was this complete disappearance of alternative media, right? Where we not only can find out about shows and stuff, but where I think there's a sense of community and stuff like that. So conceptually, the grind was like immediately exciting. When I heard it was happening, I was like, what? When I heard it was almost ready to be released, I was like, are you kidding me? And that you guys were like releasing it in the subway stations and stuff. And then the design was just like so good. The content was so good. The collaboration between what the Hoser is doing and what other orgs in Toronto are doing. I think the Green Line participates as well. And Briar Patch contributes pieces as well. So having that space and then repurposing the online reporting and journalism and having that be in a physical paper, so exciting and so cool. And like you were saying, the last two standing were now in Toronto and the Georgia Strait in Vancouver. And they both kind of got like iffy near the end. And then they just like stopped, or mostly stopped. So there's this vacuum. And it makes a ton of sense that the people who are really passionate about media and who are independent and who are progressive and who are left of center, ideologically left, it makes so much sense that these kinds of people would step in. So I was thrilled that it was you guys, and I honestly couldn't believe it. I still can't believe it. So how was, before you get back into Comrade Black, how was the reception for that inaugural launch issue, which came out like, I think, several days before the municipal elections?
Yeah. Thanks for the question and context, Andre. And I'll just say, sort of complete the story and bring us up to it, is that Now magazine hadn't been paying, or supposedly hadn't been paying their staff for months, and they haven't printed an issue since August. Mm-hmm. And the staff, when they printed the issue in August, the staff said, this is it. This is the last issue. And so that was the moment when we were like, okay, this has all been hypothetical. Now we have to make a decision. Mm-hmm. Are we going to try and do a replacement kind of publication or not? Mm-hmm. And if so, how the hell do we do it? Mm-hmm. And so Kevin and Shannon at the Hoser have been fantastic. They're like, yeah, let's do it. Let's go for it. Let's try and fill this void. Let's put something out. And we've got, friends who are many of whom are on this call or like on this telethon. So there's a republished article from Press Progress by Emily Leadham, great article about Polyev. There's a Canadian Dimension article. There's a couple Briar Patch articles. One from a music writers collective, New Feeling, and then several new original articles. And yeah, we went for it. It was a lot of work. We put in our own money and some loans, and we got like a small number of advertisers, not enough to cover costs. We're hoping for more advertisers next issue now that it actually exists. But could you remind me what the question was?
Well, but that proof of concept is really, really important. Which for me too, even though I'm a super fan of the work that everyone does, seeing it pulled off, so like it was almost gratuitous how well you guys did it. I think actually a lot of people were probably offended at how good it was. They're like, this shouldn't exist. It's too much. But my question was like the reception, feedback. What was that like? Because I don't know, like people are just picking up this paper, or they're following it on Twitter, they're reading it online. But what have you heard? It's only been like 9 days, but like...
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think there were a number of people in the sort of like journalism world in Toronto who were hyped about it. People who, like both the indie folks and also the people who were big fans of Now and are like maybe working at the Toronto Star and don't really like it, or working at the Globe and are kind of like, oh, I wish I could publish what I actually believe. And they were like, yes, like Toronto needs an alt weekly. So that was kind of the Twitterati response. Mm-hmm. But I think what we're trying to do with the publication is we printed 50,000 copies, and they're going directly into the TTC, the transit system, the subway system. And it's people who are not like obnoxiously or always on Twitter, who are picking the thing up because they're sitting in the subway and they're like, well, what am I going to do? So it has very high pickup rate in the subway. It's been like flying off the shelves because Now isn't there anymore. So people are picking it up. It's at some cafes, it's at some bookshops. And we have just started getting donations from random people, not enough, but people who are just like, yes, I like what you're doing. Looking forward to the next issue. We had a few people who were like, oh, not enough arts and culture, which is like, fair enough. Now was the event like listing Bible for Toronto. And we haven't recreated that. That would be amazing to be able to get to that point. But in terms of like saying something about the election for free, distributed in print in the subway system, bookstores, cafes, people were like, yes, thank you.
So this kind of, I mean, this kind of like DIY thing, it's so punk rock and it's so cool because there's lots of that in independent publishing. There's obviously lots of that in independent music. But with media, like, I don't know, this is so much next level than a zine or something. And one of the reasons is because of the high quality of the work that the Hoser brings to it, the Briar Patch brings to it. So Shannon, maybe you could comment on how this reinforces a progressive media ecosystem, because mutual aid is not something we usually think about when we think of like being media, being spaces in media, independent media. How has that reinforcement been something exciting to be part of?
Yeah, no, it's been like, I mean, it's been a pretty incredible like journey to, a lot of the people that we've ended up working with through this project, I had never worked with before, or, maybe like admired on Twitter or admired, their work. But yeah, to be able to sort of like band together, and different people put in, more or less work or whatever, but just to be sort of like connected to all of these like incredible outlets that I have had respect for forever, like Briar Patch, like I fucking loved it while in university, and was just like such an inspiration for me to do the journalism that I really wanted to do. So to be able to like collaborate on something like that has been so incredible. And like, I guess what I was saying earlier, like with the Harbinger network, it's like, it's so important to like have these support systems for independent media, because there's so little out there, and it's such a hard racket and a hard thing to like make profitable and keep going. And it takes so much energy and time, and we all have like part-time jobs, and we're still trying to run like a media company. So like I like having that support system, building this community, like really sort of like being in this like left indie media space together and not like completely separated has been awesome. And also, just like getting these stories out to like such a huge population, and like having people read about police violence at encampments, or like fucking horrible conditions for people who are living in the shelter hotels in Toronto. Sort of like getting this like truth out to like such a massive audience is really awesome.
Yeah. And also, the scope of it, like when I saw online that you were printing 50,000 copies, I was like, no, they're not. That's not a possible number. That seems too much. But in fact, it's true. It's accurate. And so what I love about it is this idea of thinking big, right? And thinking big is more difficult to do when you're kind of solo, but when you're collaborating with other people, not only are you like hyping each other up, but your capacity is much larger, obviously. So David, tell us a little bit about that sort of thinking big about recreating media infrastructure in Canada. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so this is the sort of tangent I was going on with Comrade Black.
Yeah.
So he started the Post Media, sort of the mastermind of making Post Media a conservative newspaper empire. And they own and publish in the biggest newspaper in almost every city in Canada. And it's part of a much larger network of mutually reinforcing idea creation and distribution networks. So it starts from anything from like the Manning Center, which is now called the Strong and Free Network. They put out a report or turn that into a book, and then that goes out to the newspapers, and they sort of dutifully republish those ideas through their spokespeople, their columnists. And then it goes on to talk radio, which is also sort of conservative controlled, and just gets out there. It becomes the noise that we are swimming in. And the left hasn't had that kind of networked infrastructure of idea development, distribution, discussion. Not in my lifetime, I don't think. Maybe once upon a time. And so I've worked in book publishing, I've worked in magazine publishing, I've been an editor with the Media Co-op. I've learned a lot working with people like Drew. And just trying to see like how to do the kind of mutual reinforcement and getting that message out. And I think Harbinger is a great example of like people in discussion with each other across shows, people in discussion with each other between sort of print and podcast, also community radio, community TV. And so I think that's like more conversations like this, like we're having right now, like this telethon is doing, bringing people together and being like, how do we get the infrastructure to get out wider? How do we get, and it's not just a matter of like, as you were saying, not just doing it yourself, but using what's existing. And like the CUTV breach collaboration is a great example of, taking the sort of existing infrastructure and using it and using it for like some great journalism. So I don't know. I see potential for a lot more of that.
So it's really exciting. And so having the grind launch 9 or 10 days ago was super exciting. It really is just sort of like the first step and the first issue. Yeah, it really makes us rethink what's possible with print media, which is in many ways a dying space, but it's so exciting to see something new come out of that. So before we wrap up, maybe a few final words from Dave and a few final words from the Hoser team. Dave?
Yeah, I think we're doing this off the side of our desks, basically. We just really wanted to get an issue out, prove that it's possible, break even, and we're pretty close actually. We've had some good donations. We had a couple advertisers, and I think if we can actually get some money coming in, I mean, the public records show that like a publication like Now or the Georgia Straight had between like $1 million and $2 million annual revenue. So if we were able to come anywhere close to that kind of annual revenue for a publication, getting that kind of advertising, that's huge. You know, like having a few staff people, any of the publications on this telethon, you know, we kind of dream of having like a few staff people full time. Like being able to do that would be incredible. So we're doing the bi-monthly, every other month publishing. If we can, maybe someday we'll have staff. Maybe we'll actually have a website that works. We're not there yet. So we're just building, we're going for it. And maybe we can, people should definitely give to Harbinger. Maybe we can also drop the link. I'll do that to the Grind fundraiser.
Definitely. Shannon, for you guys and for the Hoser team, any last words to share with viewers?
Yeah, I think we need more independent media in Canada. And like with the Grind, with the Hoser, we were just like a few people with this idea. And, you know, we got together and we put a shit ton of work into it and we made it happen. And, you know, whether we're around for 20 years or not.
Leah Bork-Cooperman, Amy Cunningham, and Shannon Karenko are in Toronto. Dave Gray-Donald is also in Toronto. You can find out more about the Hoser at thehoser.ca and follow The Grind on Twitter at TheGrindCO. If you want to support the Hoser, go to hosermedia.ca and look for The Grind at your local subway station if you're in Toronto. Before we pivot to our next segment, which is from Darts and Letters, and I'm excited about that. I just want to read another piece from Between the Lines, because they're not only publishers, they also have so many of their new and old releases available as audio books. So if you are into audiobooks about social justice and labor history, Between the Lines has a growing collection of audiobooks without bosses, nonfiction books published cooperatively by their leftist book press. Their selection includes Leslie Kern's Feminist City. She's the author of Gentrification is Inevitable and Other Lies. It's an international bestseller for anyone wanting to use their city strolls to think differently about their city as an ongoing site of gender justice. You can also check out Code White by Margaret Keith and James Brophy, which is an engaging listen that probes into the working conditions of healthcare workers in Ontario. There's What's Yours is Mine, which delves into the seedy underbelly of the sharing economy. And Unsettling Canada by Arthur Manuel and Grand Chief Ronald M. Derrickson, which is a landmark text built on a unique collaboration between two First Nation leaders that traces the history of Indigenous sovereignty in Canada. All of the Between the Lines audiobooks are available from your audiobook app of choice or for borrowing from your local public library. Look for it wherever you get your audiobooks. Stay tuned for Darts and Letters coming up at the top of the hour, and smash that follow button. More on the relaunch of Oppo coming up soon as well.